Degree Net Podcast. The Third Degree Net Podcast. The Third Degree Net Podcast.
Well, hello there, FC Dallas Curious fan. Welcome to yet another episode of Third Degree, the podcast. We are without the Dan today because he had apparently a custom request on his OnlyFans page that took priority today. So Dan will be participating in that private session versus doing the episode. So it's just me and your hero, my hero, everybody's hero, and the editor, founder of thirddegree.net, and the original soccer influencer himself, the good Buzz Carrick. Come in, Buzz.
Hey, Peter. Yeah, it does take Dan a long time to get that beard trimmed up and groomed perfectly for his OnlyFans work.
So. Well, I think I heard the request involved braiding it into like cornrows or something. So
yeah, and then putting them between his toes or something like that. I think.
Yeah. Okay. I thought I'm the one that's supposed to cross the line, Buzz, not you. That's my role on this podcast.
Just a mild foot fetish.
You're the ever stable, dependable, clean. What's the one? Unsullied one on the podcast.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
All right. Very good. Well, here we are, Buzz. The season is over, and Dallas lost another game. I know there's another game left, but really, come on. The season's over, so we can start talking about postseason stuff now, can't we?
A little bit. We do have a long winter to fill, so let's not go too crazy, but we can start talking a little bit about where we are.
It does seem ridiculous that we're back at this weirdo MLS quirk again, where between the penultimate and last game of the season, there's an international break. So now Dallas, who are literally have nothing to play for, have to wait 2 full weeks between last Saturday and the game against Kansas City. It's so stupid.
Well, they did this under Luccin one time, and I remember they really liked it because they were in a playoff hunt, and so they were well rested for that season final that they really needed. Obviously, this time it doesn't pay off because now you're going to sit around for a week doing nothing. I mean, I know the team was given several days off of training, for example, and then they're going to come back and get ready to play a meaningless game against another team that's in the bottom of the cellar. It'll just probably be nothing more than a glorified kick around, except of course that. One of those coaches is not necessarily fighting for his job because he is the technical director, but the one here certainly will be, is still fighting for a job, and he'll want his team to perform. So he's going to have a real tough task to try and get them up for that game, I would imagine.
So the team goes to Portland. I think I said they lost. It just feels like a loss because they did get a draw in Portland, 0-0. Weird lineups. Lots of things are weird about this game, and I'm just going to be straightforward honest. I totally forgot the game was even happening because it started so late, and the season's over. So I'm going to have to lean on you, Buzz, to kind of explain to everybody how we ended up at Donuts on this one.
Well, the reason they ended up at Donuts is because Jimmy Maurer stood on his head again. I think he had 7 saves. He was not the broadcast player of the game because the home keeper was fairly decent as well. And the crew being home, I'm not surprised they picked the home guy. But Jimmy had 7 saves and was phenomenal again. I think it was sort of like he looked at that San Jose game and was like, not that he was terrible in San Jose, but he wasn't, great. And he probably thought, what, I had that great mic drop, a month and a half ago. I'm going to do it again. So he did. He was phenomenal. He made multiple saves that kept them in it. But then again, so did the other team. Dallas had a really nice offensive performance. They put up a good XG, if that's your thing. They got a high volume of shots. It wasn't quite as efficient in terms of on target as we would like, but it was not terrible. They made plenty of opportunities. One of the criticisms, when we talk about Logan Farrington, we'll bring this up again in a second, but overall, it was a pretty solid performance by FC Dallas. They controlled the ball a fair bit. They had a nice control of midfield. The defense didn't break down too badly. But other than Maurer having to make a bunch of saves, it wasn't, the amount of chances they had was in line with the amount of chances that Dallas had. Both teams were going for it. Both teams went after it, and both teams just got blanked by the other team's keeper.
Were you surprised? I mean, I know the season's over, but it was a weirdo lineup, especially because he was playing 4 in the back with Areola as the right back.
Yeah. Well, it's weird to have gone through, the whole Luccin part of the season with a back three, pretty much not all, the majority of it. And then now once you're eliminated, then go to a four. And that was really quite surprising, honestly. There was a little bit of rotation. Logan Farrington came in for Petter Musa. We'll talk about that again in a second.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that you would go back four and then not use a real center back and continue with this Marco Farfan thing at center back and Junka being the left back feels weird. There's obviously some things going on there, and we have some stuff on that too in a minute, but Kamungo got a chance to get in there in favor of Jesus Ferreira, who did sub in for him at some point. So yeah, it was a bit of a weird one. 4-3-3, a single pivot. I mean, Armindi spent part of the time in there by himself as a single, and Show was playing higher as an 8 with Leggett. It was kind of a weird situation, but I think once they were eliminated after the San Jose, that Luccin has started tweaking towards what he would actually want to do. I think, and again, another big topic we should talk about is why it's been a back three all this time when maybe he really wants a back four.
Okay, but if this is what he really wants to do, why wouldn't he do this in a time when the game counted? Because he doesn't know if this is going to work or not?
No, he's made several comments over the last couple of weeks about how he wishes he'd had the team for a whole season. He didn't have enough time to implement what he wants. He has a shape in mind he wants, and couldn't get it going because he didn't have enough time with these players. When you're playing a back three and saying, I have a shape in mind, I want to play. Well, obviously it's not the back three then. And the minute he's eliminated, now we see the four again. So I think this is where he would like to go if he were to continue as the coach. I think he just felt like he didn't have time to evolve the team away from a back three because they had spent the first, 8 months of the year basically since camp opened and when the players started gathering way back in January or whatever, they were working on a back three. So
I'm sure we'll talk about Luccin and his coaching situation or his chances of getting the job. But this isn't a lineup for a guy that appears to be still fighting for his place in winning this job by sitting Jesus and Musa and putting in Kamungo and Farrington.
I think he benched Musa for that locker room stunt.
Mm.
He said that he understood it, and it was okay with it. And then he says, not okay with it, but he says it won't happen again, and
you're talking just for people that may have missed last week when he got subbed out in the game that ended the season, he walked straight to the locker room.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And
Musa
Musa did. And Luccin said that, he understood why it happened, but it wasn't going to happen again. And sort of, it sounded like that they were kind of over it for a big extent, but then the next game rolls around and Musa doesn't start. And then you're in this game and you're 0-0, and you have a chance to win it on the road. You're a coach playing to win a job and you don't put him in, you don't bring him off the bench. Like he brought Jesus off the bench. Presumably he wants to give Bernie a little bit of a chance at the end of the season to sort of prove something. So you gave him a game and then you bring Jesus in, but you don't bring in Musa. Well, okay, when you don't bring him in, that says to me that, okay, you benched him. There's nothing official that said he did. This is just my read on the fact that he didn't start him and then didn't play him in a winnable game. That's alarm bells. You're not hurt. That's you've been benched. Yeah.
Okay. Well, the result means nothing. It probably means more to Portland than it does to Dallas for playoff positioning purposes. But it is, I don't know. It's a frustrating end of the season. Anything else? But I guess the other big obvious question is the Tafari situation.
Yep. Well, I want to talk about Farrington a little bit too, but let's talk about Tafari. Yeah. Dan got on the post-game press conference, Zoom conference call and asked about that. And Luccin has a relatively long-winded, winding answer, and I will paraphrase it basically to he's choosing to play the center backs that he feels are most consistent, and he talked about how he thinks very highly of Nkosi and thinks he could be a really high-end, big-time center back. It is a big-time center back, and he just said that, over the last bit, effectively, he's saying that that Ibeagha and even Farfan had been the more consistent pairing. Now, I think a part of that, he really is a strong believer in a left-footed guy on that other side, because I don't know how you run out a 5'10" guy who gets beat on corners for goals and think that's a good idea. But, there's something to be said for Nicosi when he is playing really aggressively. He does become a little bit inconsistent, and you could point to the 0 goals allowed and say, oh, look how good the defense was. But then again, they gave up a fair number of shots and Maurer had to make 7 saves. So I don't know that the defense was much better in this one than it's been lately, other than your keeper performed for you and kept it clean. So Nicosi, I think with this coach, is in a position where I don't think if Luccin continues, I don't think it's like he just dislikes Nicosi or anything. I just think it's right now he wants a more stable, consistent, performing set of center backs, and I would imagine he probably thinks like all of us that
is it just me? Is it just me, or is this now the second coach that has had this kind of given off a vibe that maybe they don't jive as much with Nicosi as the fans do?
Well, the team certainly doesn't. They pay Ibeagha, basically a DP salary. He's like, I don't know, $75 below a DP, and so he's not a DP, but he might as well be. It's effectively the same salary slot. And Nicosi's like half that. So clearly they think Ibeagha is the guy as an organization. Now, I think both these coaches, from time to time, between interviews and quotes and whatever else, they feel they think really highly of Nicosi. I think his teammates do too, the way Yarmendi keeps giving him the captain's armband. But they know that there is some inconsistency there. There's some volatility to Nicosi's play, some up and down. Some days he's phenomenal and some days he's not as good. And I think Luccin in particular is willing to trade a little bit of the up to eliminate some of the down, it seems, especially when he was fighting at the end there to try and salvage every point he could to get himself a playoff shot, which didn't obviously happen. So, Nicosi's just now hitting his prime play window, so he won't get significantly better than he is right now in terms of like pure game. But he'll continue to build wisdom. And so he should mature over the next 3 or 4 seasons and hopefully become a little more of that smooth, day-to-day, reliable, even-keeled defender, and be really good for the next 4 or 5 seasons if he can do that.
It just makes me wonder after this season and kind of this, if I remember correctly, there was a kind of a spotty run with him and Estevez at the end of last season too.
A little bit, yeah.
Just makes me wonder if he's potentially trade bait and will actually be here next season.
I suppose that's possible. He does have a good salary value. He is not too expensive for a center back, starting level center back. He's it depends on obviously what anybody else's teams has available, and who out there might have the need for a guy and have the assets that could pry him out. But at the same time, the things that make him appealing to other teams would make him appealing to FC Dallas. For a team that is,
well, unless they know something about him that the rest of us don't know, or there's something about his game that just is like, for example, keeping him off of getting call-ups to the national team.
Well, the national team's another whole other level, and I think it's honestly that consistency. Like, there are some games where he looks fantastic, and then there are other games where he gets caught 2 or 3 times, overreaches or makes an error, and not everybody can be a national team player. Sometimes you just need a guy that's just right on the outside of that who will frankly not get called up as much, so that can be a positive for your team. Sometimes you can make the case that you want a team full of guys that are so good that they at least get talked about with the national team, but then don't actually get the call-ups,
Matt Hedges.
You have them all the time. Yeah. Matt Hedges is a good example, and his contract value is good for FC Dallas, just like could be good for other people, and he is just now at his prime. So you have to think he's got, 4, 5, 6 good seasons ahead of him at what is still a pretty good value. American, doesn't cost an international spot, is super athletic, super rangy, can cover tons of ground. You can pair him up with different kinds of guys and he can play both sides. So there's a lot of value there.
And he's got some ball skills with the ball at his feet. The guy can dribble and beat people. And, we talked about this at the end of last season, which was this idea that maybe they could let him carry the ball out of the back more often. And I don't think they didn't do that this year, probably because they were so worried about their center back moving out of position and leaving a gaping hole back there. But I don't know. I just think there's more to Tafari's game than this club has explored.
I think so too. Dallas's defense is not great at passing out of the back. Starting with Paz is not super great at it, and most of their center backs are not really very great at it. And when you play a back three, you end up with wing backs being up in the midfield, and wing backs aren't as good at it as central midfielders are. So you kind of have a team right now that is actually not that great at playing out of the back that yet wants to play out of the back. So Nicosi is actually one of the better players back there in terms of progressive passing. His overall passing percentage is low. Sorry, not low, lower than Ibeaga's, for example, but Ibeaga plays it much safer. It just kind of goes back and forth and goes to the keeper and then goes to the other guy. Whereas Nicosi's trying to actually get it forward and split lines more. So
yeah, Nicosi also has this bad habit of trying to ping long balls deep, and he overhits them or misses them. And sometimes he hits them, sometimes he doesn't. But that is a shortcoming of his game. Is that part of his decision making?
He's not as good at that as like Tanner Tessman, for example, but at least he's trying it. And he's the only other player in the back that is decent at that is Sam Junka. Is pretty decent at it, but no one back there for Dallas is elite at that. Nicosi and Sam, I don't mind trying that a little more than some of the other guys, but there really isn't anybody back there unless Paul's playing like full on fullback, but that only happened in this one game. Really. It's just not really. Again, that's part of Dallas's weird roster construction is that they want to play out of the back and yet they don't have great passing center backs. So, which way you want to go with Nicosi depends a lot on how you feel you need to do with your other center backs. And if you already need one center back because Ibeaga is not getting any younger, and if you're going to play three at the back, then you need two. And that's before you do something like trade Nicosi, where you would actually need to do all three. That's a big ask. Whereas Nicosi is, American domestic, good value contract, athletic, covers ground, like lots to like there if you can coach him into a way that works for your team.
Interesting. I just realized the last time Dallas held somebody scoreless was that road game in Vancouver. They've only done that a few times this season, kept a clean sheet. Now, this is the first time this is the interesting part. I think, let me go back and look at this. This is only the third time. Yeah, this is only the third time since Luccin became manager that they did not score in a game. They didn't score against Cincinnati, they didn't score against Vancouver, and they didn't score against Portland. Every other game they've scored at least one, but more than that, I think their average is like 2 point something a game.
Yeah, I think in the big picture of things, Dallas's defense is not particularly great. I mean, they have 55 goals allowed, which is about in the 1/3 mark in terms of like the season the league. They're like, that's right around 20th out of 30 ish.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the same thing is true for goals for. I mean, they're more sort of middle, a little bit more middle of the pack goals for. And I think that was boosted a little bit by Luccin being so offensive over the latter third of the season and or maybe even it's half a season. Although the Leagues Cup in there makes it look funny. It's both of those categories. They're sort of middle to bottom third, and both of them could use improvement. I don't think there's any question that, it's not any surprise that there's not very many shutouts on the Dallas list this year because their defense honestly is not that great. And that's with Martin Paz playing really well.
Right. Yeah. I want to talk about Paz here in a second. But you said you wanted to mention something about Farrington and his start.
Yeah. Logan Farrington, did a pretty nice job for filling in for, Petter Musa. Like, for example, he had 30 touches and he managed to get 4 shots off and one of them on target, which literally matches Musa's 90-minute average, 4 and 1. Logan had 2 for 2 on take-ons. He had 3 progressive carries, 5 shot creating actions. He made 4 progressive passes. He did a lot of things right. He actually had an XG of 0.7, which was really high for the team, and the biggest one on the team. And that's a pretty good, solid performance, except that in a 0-0 game, they needed a 9 to actually convert. And this is the difference between a guy that gets paid $70,000 and a guy that gets paid $2 million or whatever it is that Musa gets. Right. This is where, a lot of the things look good. And that's not to rip Logan Farrington. That's just to talk about the difference between Logan Farrington being a very exciting young player that we're very interested in his future. But the reason he's not starting example over Musa is that Musa probably gets one and he didn't. The ability to come up with something when you need it and convert when your team needed it and the game was winnable is the difference between him and Musa. And it's the difference between Jesus and Bernie frankly, this season too. Even though Jesus has had his worst season in like 5 years, Bernie's had an even worse season than that, right?
Man, you know, Kamungo, I saw him in the lineup and I thought, man, I don't even know. I guess he came in and substituted in a game recently, but over the course of the season, talk about a guy that has fallen off the face of the earth after, you know, getting a lot of media attention for all the obvious and very good reasons. But I don't know what happened. Probably mostly the formation change, but of anybody on the team that really benefited the least from all of that, it had to have been Kamungo.
Yeah, Bernie Kamungo plays with natural ability, a natural game. He is not a player that has had high-level coaching until very, very recently. So when you take him out of his natural instinctive position, which is left wing in a front three, which is what you got in a 4-3-3, which is why I think he went ahead and started him in this game. In the 3-4-3, the other shape Dallas plays, those high three guys, remember, they're not real wingers. Those guys are Allen and Jesus. They're asked to play underneath like a double 10. The width comes from a wingback, which is why they've tried Bernie at wingback, but it's a disaster because he doesn't know how to play wingback. They tried him underneath. He doesn't know how to play underneath. He knows how to play that wing spot. So when you actually had the formation that benefited that, it fit him, Luccin immediately threw him right on there. So if anything killed Bernie's season, it's that. And he's a player that will either need a whole bunch of coaching and time and playing time, frankly, probably for something like North Texas, in order to figure out how to play somewhere else other than high wing, or you're just going to have to play a way to play high wing if you want to take advantage of him. And I'm not sure you do, because as long as you have Allen and Jesus kicking around and you got guys like Patterson Delgado and you got Farrington rolling around, all of a sudden those spots are pretty dang competitive, especially if he can only play in one particular formation. So that's going to be tough for him.
Well, like I said, it ended up donuts. That didn't help Portland a lot, who are holding on to a lead over Austin for that final playoff. So I guess they they clinched, didn't they? Portland? Yeah, they did. Yeah, Portland did clinch. I'm sorry.
They're just playing for seeding. You know, they had, if they would have had a chance to get out of the play-in game, if they would have, won that one and then won the next one. But I think now they're knocked down to where they're stuck in the playoff game. So they're still going to be fighting for the home field, I think. I was settled steady what their needs were, but.
Yeah, they'll either go to Vancouver or Minnesota, but I think we'd all love a Cascadia game for that playing game for sure.
Yeah, right.
All right. Anything else about Dallas 0, Portland 0 before we move on to the next subject?
Not really. There wasn't a whole bunch else in it. Let me look real quick. I would not have, this bothers me a little bit. I would not have started Allen on this game in turf, not when he played on Wednesday.
Yeah.
And sure enough, he pulled up lame at halftime basically. And I don't know whether he was faking that or whatever, he sprinted off the field and then he did not come back in the second half. And the stat line between him and the Sebling who replaced him is just insane. Like, if I gave you here's a line, right, for a player. Okay. 78% passing, 6 progressive passes, 4 shot creating actions, 5 balls into the final third, 2 for 3 on tackles, 4 progressive receptions, 1 for 1 on takeoffs. That's a fantastic half of a game of soccer. That's amazing. That's in Sebling.
Wow. That's fantastic. That is good.
Yeah. Allen had 1 progressive pass, 0 shot creations, 2 progressive carries. He was terrible by every metric. Tsiki outplayed him by like 100%. And that's incredible for a guy who's as good as Alan Velasco. So what's going on there? Okay. Probably workload. It's his 3rd game in a week. It's on turf. Maybe something went wrong in terms of why he's running off at halftime. Like he's terrified because I'm feeling something in my knee. We don't know because it was on the road. They didn't talk about it at all. So, and then Sebling was a baller and outplayed him completely. And Sebling was the big catalyst for this better second half performance Dallas had. They didn't get it done, but credit to Tsiki for being such a good performer. Because really the real takeaway from this is going to be like, man, if something happened to Allen here, if this is a setback, and that's pure conjecture on my part, other than how often does a player sprint off the field at halftime, and especially when he had some sort of concern that may or may not have been real, if possibly that he was faking that. I don't know. I'm not privy to that, but that raised a little bit of like, in my head. And hopefully it's all for good. And also Sebastian Lletget was pretty good too.
Pause. he didn't start obviously again. He ended up leaving, going with his national team, and I'm assuming he'll end up playing. Did that game actually happen yet?
It was today. Yeah, it was today. He played. Yeah, I believe he started.
Do you have any follow-up thoughts on the whole? They ended up tying in Bahrain, by the way, 2-2. Do you have any thoughts about that? The follow-up to why he didn't play or should have been playing?
Well, he got back in training and they showed a picture of him in training. He definitely has, the glove on the one wrist was huge. He definitely has it taped. Once Dallas was eliminated, I 100% was on board with leaving him out. Don't play him again. But again, like the San Jose game, like if that would have been an MLS Cup day, would he have played him through that pain? I get it. It's supposed to be club over country, but I understand why maybe for him it's not, given how much of a massive financial windfall it must be for him given currently. And I get him wanting to preserve that, but it kind of bugged me a little bit. I mean, granted,
think of all the miles he's getting for his frequent flyer club thing.
Miles are huge. Right. Yeah. But Jimmy came in and did a great job. And I was once they were eliminated, I was 100% okay with Paz not playing. That's fine. And by the way, I just to follow that up, Jimmy was phenomenal. I would now let Jimmy, have that be the walk-off game. I was 100% no way do you play Antonio Carrera on the road after you've just been eliminated on turf against in a situation where your team might get shelled going in. I totally bought into like not playing that kid. Oscar Pereira used to say, "Is you really careful when you give kids their debut? You can't just throw them in anytime. You got to be careful." And so now you come back to Dallas, you have a week and a half, 2 weeks off. You're against a team that's even worse than you, who's mailing the season in. It's at home. It's on grass. Okay, now you put Antonio Carrera in. Now you give Antonio the last game and you let Jimmy have that road game walk-off dominant performance. I'd be okay with going Antonio on the next one, but I would not have 100% done it in Portland.
Okay. Well, it'll be interesting to have a conversation about the overall season and as we do grades and reviews of players and so forth, because I think there was some surprise that Paz wasn't listed on – what was the list that Dan was talking about?
Well, yeah, the league put out the nominees for end of season awards.
That's what it was.
And Dallas is not a very good team, so you're not expecting to have a lot of people like in serious consideration. But the thing is that like all of those awards had like 20 or 25 nominees, some of them multiple nominees for a team. Now I get like that you could say, "Oh, Paz isn't goalie of the year." Yeah, sure, I'd buy that. But to not even be in like the 25 candidates listed, that's ridiculous.
Well, who are those nominated by the clubs themselves?
They are. So like how
does that mean Dallas didn't nominate him?
I guess, or there's some technicality I can't fathom. I don't know how he's not in there because Petter Musa's in there for newcomer of the year. Again, Petter Musa's not going to be newcomer of the year, but he's a totally legit candidate. Like Martin Paz, like if you want to have an argument like he's not top 3, he's not top 5, whatever, you can have those arguments. But there's no way he's not a top 10 keeper in the league. So for him to not be nominated, to me, there's got to be something we're missing because there's no way he's not top 25 keepers in this league.
Yeah, 25 I would agree with, but man, because Dan made a reference to somebody voting Stefan Fry over Paz, and I paused and I went and looked at all the stats. I was actually kind of shocked how consistently down the line Paz is in all the important goalkeeping stats this year. It's worse, way worse than I would have thought, considering how much we talked about him saving Dallas's bacon time in, time out, which is probably a bigger reflection about how bad the team was defensively, et cetera, et cetera. But statistically, Paz did not have a very good season, at least just kind of my scanning the numbers earlier today.
Yeah, no, I did not scan the rankings, but there's been a note in the FC Dallas media notes for the back half of the season that Paz has been leading the league in saves for a giant chunk of the year, basically. So like he probably is down in goals against, save percentage and other things like that, but the volume of shots he's playing is like really, really high. He's saving a lot of shots. So I would admit, and I freely admit, that he shouldn't be actually in the real conversation for goalie of the year. But for him to not be on the 25 listed is just absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah. I didn't realize it had gone down to 25. I thought we were talking top 5 or 10.
Yeah. Well, even top 10, I think you got to consider him.
Yeah.
I think he's in the top 10. But It does raise a fun, bigger question, which I think we'll talk about when Dan gets back, which was that how many Dallas players at any given position are in the top 10 players in the league at their given position. And I think the only one that's under consideration is Paz.
All right. Just so I'm looking at it right now, just so he knows. Stuver's in first with 124, and then McCarthy with the Galaxy at 120, and then Paz is tied with Freeze from NYCFC with 117 for third place.
Yeah, he probably fell off since he didn't play the last 2 games.
And those are the number of saves. But if you go into some of the more, other goalkeeping stats, that's where it kind of falls off, and I'm kind of surprised sometimes. Especially when you get into like expected allowed and things like that, he's a little further down the list than you would probably anticipate. So
yeah, probably.
Yeah. All right. So there you go. Dallas 0, Portland 0. One more game against Kansas City sometime in the distant future. We'll sleep many, many times before that game happens.
Yeah.
Well, the fallout of this game that I started getting into was this idea of Luccin's performance as manager of this club, because there's been an ongoing debate. Like there was up until, they bombed out and didn't make the playoffs, the bandwagon for Peter to take this job was absolutely brimming with everybody. And now it's, I think, like Luccin and his wife sit in the front 2 seats and the rest of the car is empty. Mm-hmm. And that got me to sit down and start doing some numbers and comparing it to Estevez. And I'm not sure points per game is the ultimate stat to pull in this, because there's other things to go along with it. But it's interesting to me that depending on how this final game goes, I don't know if everybody realizes that Luccin, if he was to lose this game against Kansas City, his total point, or his points per game total for 18 games versus Nico's, I think he's on 16 games, is only slightly better. It's like 1.14 to 1.3 if he loses the game. If they win the game, Luccin's MLS only total goes up to 1.5 versus 1.14 for Estevez. And I guess some people will consider that considerably better. But what I do find interesting, because I do think it's fair to include all the games, which include the cup games.
Yeah, I agree.
Because that was in there. Is if you include all the games, it really, if he wins this game, the difference between him and Estevez is not very different. It would, let's see, how did I have this? If Luccin wins the last game versus Kansas City, his league only points per game jumps to 1.5. But when you include his cup losses, it would match Nico's at 1.29. They would essentially have the exact same point total of 1.2 time if you include the Open Cup games that Estevez won this season, and the Open Cup game and the 2 League Cup games Luccin lost this year. And I also think the other important part of this is that if you split Luccin's run into 2 halves of 9 games each, he was 5-3-1 in the first of those, but 6 of those were home games. And in the latter half of the season, he's 2-4-2, with only 3 of those being, the last one obviously he'll have 4 home games. So at best, his second half of the season will be 3-4-2.
Yeah, well, obviously there's an underscore there of home versus away, and what a massive difference that is.
I hope I didn't give everybody tired head, but you see my point. I think my point is that ultimately, no matter how this season plays out, the team performance under Luccin versus what it is under Estevez, the difference is more stylistically than results based, and this is a results based business.
Yeah, it's almost like the coaching didn't make all that much difference, that really it's about the players, which is something I always have said for years and always do say.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, what's the famous quote? I'm going to paraphrase it. I think that like a good coach only can make like 10% of a difference, but a bad coach can make like 30% of a difference. But I think that might even be stretching it a little bit. It's like you only have the players that you have. This league is very difficult to make massive changes to a roster. It's like when you're playing for coaching big clubs around the world with tons of money, you can make massive changes over. You used to be able to do more than you can now. Now the fair play stuff is handcuffing people a little bit, but It's much more difficult in this league to change your roster over because you can't just go buy whatever you need. You have to develop it from your academy or draft it or sign it as a free agent, or trade for it. It's not as simple. And, I think that there's a little bit of an unfairness, if you will, to the idea that Peter Luccin had to win his way into the playoffs to get this job when you had a team that only had, was it 3 wins at that point of the season?
Right.
We were having discussions over the first half of the season about, is this the worst team in club history or not? In terms of points, in terms of performance on the field, wins and losses, which is what in the end of the day matters, and to ask a guy like, oh, it's your job if you can turn that into a winner. And at the time we said it's going to be astronomical. Look, amount of wins it will take to pull that off. I mean, what did the Western Conference bottom team end up being? As I look real quick.
Right now it's Portland.
Yeah, it's Portland, and they're on 46. So they got a game to play, and that's already over what I thought it was going to be, which was 42 when we first started doing it. And eventually I raced it to 44. And at the time of the coaching change, we were like, he's going to have to win 8 of his last 12 or something to pull that off. And sure enough, that's probably what it would have taken. I mean, to get above Portland's 46 when they have one game to play, you would have had to gotten to, 48, 49. And at the time they were on 30, was it at the time? I mean,
well,
20, it was awful. I remember it was.
No, I mean, it was such, it was the odds of that. And which also then makes me wonder how seriously they ever have been considering Luccin for this job in the first place, considering they kind of really threw him to the wolves to make the race. I'm fascinated to know what between Dan, Clark, and Andre the thinking is on how they're going to go about hiring somebody for this job. And is Luccin still a serious candidate?
Oh, I think so. I think he did enough, as you say, in terms of style, and did enough when they were when they in that first part of the thing, like at home in front of the coach, immediately rallied the team and improved the performance of several important players. I think those things all get him in the conversation. I don't think that he's won it and even though a lot of the national guys seem to think he has won it, I don't think he's won it. I think he's gotten himself an interview. You and I both have now heard of people coming in here, that are going to be candidates. So it definitely is an open thing. He doesn't have it locked down, but he's also talking about next season a lot already. So, he certainly thinks he's in the mix. And I think he's in the mix too.
Okay.
So we'll see. It's going to come down to, the sell. The problem for Luccin is that he has to go in there and convince them that what I did was based on what was here. The players that were here, the formation that was here, the work they had done all year. I can't turn it over completely overnight. But if you give me the right players, I can play the way I want to play, and it's going to be great. I'll look at how player X, player Y reacted. Hopefully he's going to walk in there with a plan. Here's the 4 or 5 positions I need turned over or whatever it is, he'll have a leg up in that sense and of knowing the roster. Whereas if a guy comes in from who knows where else, if Caleb Porter gets fired and he gets an interview, they're going to go, okay, Caleb, what's your plan? It's like, dude, I don't know anything about this roster. It won't be that way. Any MLS coach will know, but somebody from outside the league won't know, from somebody from other conferences or other countries, they're not going to know. So it'll depend on how he performs in an interview. I don't think there's any candidates that we're hearing about that make us go, wow, that's crazy. That guy's way out of the normal. It's all the normal crap we're always hearing about with this team. It's the budget. We know what it is, so.
Question.
Yeah.
If in fact they offer Luccin the job, do you think he gets paid exactly the same as Estevez? Or do they save some money there?
I would bet they would save a little money there because Estevez, remember, came out of a national team assistant job, probably was a little more high profile than Luccin, who's coming out of, an internal club candidate is always going to be lower paid than a guy external. I used to say this about, people have always said this to me before about business as you work your way in your career. If you stay the same place where you started, someone at that company will always think of you as the intern. Right. Whereas if you get headhunted, you go somewhere else, you're the savior coming in, the big gun that they've found and hired.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so to the Hunts and to Zanata, maybe not to Zanata, but to the Hunts, Luccin's always going to be the former player that they gave their first job to a decade ago in the academy. Whereas if you're going to go out and get somebody else, they're the hired gun you went and got. So that guy's almost always going to be higher paycheck probably.
Well, moving on to the next related topic, no matter who is the manager of this club next season, the most imperative improvement needs to come in roster construction. And I want to congratulate you on this week for putting digital pen to digital paper and writing up a blog post kind of outlining this conversation that you, Dan, and I have been having since before the season started, which was how ridiculously poorly this roster was constructed this season and what a high risk overall value it was that just kind of blew up in their face. And I thought, and I think based on all the reaction that I saw online to it, was that I think you did a really good job, Buzz, of detailing the giant, massive problems this roster had even before the season started.
Yeah, I just felt like that we had been saying all year that the roster was poorly constructed, and it's like we never really had the bandwidth on a podcast to break the whole thing down, because it is a monster thing to break down why it's particularly bad. Any one of those comments that I put in there, any one of those little things I put in there, there are ways you could refute any one of them, but by itself. But when you add them all together, it adds up to a gigantic soup of crap, because it was so many things that were off or tweaked bad or high risk, low reward. It just all compounded into awfulness. It just was like, you could read it and you go, oh, I disagree with that one, I disagree with that one. And that's fine. You could disagree with a lot of them. You could even disagree with my takes on how they should have addressed it, but you have to recognize that, like, anyone, there were like 7 or 8 different problems I listed, and even 1 or 2 or 3 of them could derail your season. And like, to have 7 or 8 of them was obviously just a huge misfire across the board.
Well, I mean, I think it's a story where you could look at this, you could see them in the office, look at this roster and go, you know what? If we get lucky on the injury front and the wear and tear front, this is actually a pretty interesting roster that could make some noise. And even if this happens, or if Allen doesn't come back fast enough, or we don't get Giovanni Jesus back, we could still pull something off. You could see them talking themselves into why this roster could work this season. But man, I'm telling you, I think across the board, when you go through and you look at all the potential of how it could go wrong, I can't think of one instance that didn't blow up in their face. And then you tack on just the natural, occurrence of injury that you get anyway, like the Liam Frazier injury or Ema being hurt a lot this season. All the other things blew up in their face almost without exception.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, like, of all those 7 or 8 different problem areas, I think all of them went sideways. The only one that I think went better than I expected was Alan Velasco came back faster than I expected. And even then, he missed 26 games in all comps. So even though he came back faster than expected, it was still way too late. And you can disagree about how they should have gone about it, but to make that bet that, like, all 3 of my DPs are going to hit, and then when one of them was going to be out for the bulk of the year, even when he came back with 8 games left, that's not enough. And then Jesus combined that with his worst season since like 2018. That's 2 out of your 3 DPs and you're screwed.
Yeah, but here's the problem with Velasco. He did come back, and maybe he came back faster, quote unquote, than you thought he would. But his overall addition to the team wasn't significant this year. It's not like he banged a bunch of goals or created a bunch of assists for the season. And the whole point to him rejoining the season was to do those things. Like, they were counting on him being an important part of them making the playoffs. So that's the reason why I feel like this is such a wasted season, because they could have dramatically improved this team by IRing him for the season and going out and getting a replacement. And I think that's really that's probably the number one failure on Zanata and Hunt's part. For 2024.
He had 2 goals and 1 assist in those games. And that was my stance way back in the winter, was that, the value of DPs is so incredibly massive that if you put him on season IR, you can replace him with another DP, and then you can get out of that problem next year. You can use your GAM, you can do a buyout, you can trade somebody, you can sell somebody. Like you can burn that bridge later. It's like, but instead you sacrifice this season, and when you include that on top of all the other things, it only got worse. I mean, if that had been the only thing, you probably could have gotten rid of it, but it wasn't the only thing. There were like 7 or 8 other things.
I know.
It was just awful.
If you haven't read it, go find it on Buzz's page at thirddegree.net. It is good detail and really finally explains to the nth degree why this season was a total failure. And that does fall on the shoulders of one Andre Zanata for sure. Because this next topic really is... Hold
on. Okay. Let's talk about Zanata first.
Well,
right.
Okay.
So somebody commented that my piece sounded like I was blaming Zanata for all the problems. And I want to say that he is definitely culpable of it. But remember, at this club, player personnel decisions are made by a committee. So 100% Zanata is at fault in this, but so is Dan Hunt, and so is the coach. Those 3 people make player decisions. It was Nico. In the second half, it was Luccin. Now, Zanata got promoted, and so there's also a TD. So now there's probably 4 people that are involved in those roster decisions. If you start talking about the academy, then Chris Hayden joins the committee. So you're talking about 3, 4, or 5 people on a committee that are making all player personnel decisions. So 100%, yes, is not as culpable, but so is the entire committee. And maybe that's the problem. Maybe it's the committee that's the problem rather than the fact that there isn't one person driving the boat.
So whether it's Zanata by himself or a committee, the other part of what happened this week that is really damning is the fact that the MLS 22 under 22 came out. And for the first time in as long as I can remember, not only is Dallas not like at the top of the list, they don't have anybody on the list. And I can't even remember the last time that happened. And when you add that on top of the fact that they didn't make the playoffs, man, that's a lot of egg on club.
Yeah, one of the problems in my roster build was the fact that they went with all these insurance old players that took away the playing time from a lot of the young developing players. And that was a direct contributor to why to this awful roster build situation. Patrick Delgado got some votes, so he might have been right outside the 22. But you're talking about a club that has had, your Jesus Ferreras, your Peppys, your Alan Velasco last year. Alan not eligible this year. Neither was Bernie Camugo. They both turned 22. But we are in the period where we had a little bit of this gap in the academy, but at the same time, you have had good players come through now. So Nolan only played 4 games, 194 minutes. Endele, a younger player. No, he's a little bit older. Thomas Pondeka, 3 games, 116 minutes. Tariq Scott, 2 games. You had a whole litany of all these homegrowns. Carrera, Giovanni Jesus, not even a homegrown, U22 initiative, 0 games. Enesali, U22 initiative, 0 games. Another homegrown, Ali Azura, 0 games. So it's compounded that you haven't found a way to get these guys minutes. And in fact, you ate them up by having these old 30, 35, 36-year-olds taking up spots that should have been occupied and minutes that should have been occupied these young players. So it's led to a situation where the only really exciting young players are guys you found from outside the organization, like Delgado, and otherwise they're down in North Texas.
Well, I mean, Delgado was the only one that even got any kind of consideration. And I think by and large, we're all not super high on Delgado in terms of potential. I think he's got little nice moments about his game, but I don't foresee him becoming a MLS starting 11 type player.
It's an interesting question. He is only 20. But I think a lot of the problem too is that, remember we had this whole discussion where we found out he was a 10,
right?
And not a 6 or an 8, which is where they were playing him, and they still continue to play him. How is he going to get minutes at his real position when you've got Allen around and Jesus around and now Logan Farrington and Bernie and these really talented younger players in the organization are ahead of him in the pecking order for the spot that's his natural spot. It's why is he even here? Mm-hmm. They used him all year at a place where Paxton should have been playing or Leggett should be playing or once Show came in, Show's going to be playing. So it's just, it's just a weird spot for a kid who, for them to have brought in a kid in a position where that they already had boatloads of young talent, and they produce boatloads of young talent from the academy too.
Well, it does. I was thinking about this today as I was driving back from lunch, which is I really don't. I didn't care about the fact that they played Portland, and I really have zero interest in what happens against Kansas City. What I really am reserving all of my enthusiasm for is figuring out and watching how Dan and Clark Hunt play their cards for this club over the course of the next 3 seasons. Because, I think you could build a story that, because of the stadium renovation and the fact that the stadium will be in some state of 50% operation for 3 entire seasons.
Yeah.
There's 2 ways of looking at that. Do you just kind of take your foot off the gas and realize it is what it is and save your pennies and run this as a bottom line operation and take your lumps and work towards trying to put together the most exciting 2028 season you could possibly imagine, with probably another new coach and maybe a big signing? I don't know. Or do you run the risk of this becoming Southlake 2.0, where the game day experience and the team on the field and everything about this becomes so funked that you risk really damaging the excitement over the new stadium when it finally opens in 28? And that part, to me, I can't. And if you decide that you can't afford to have that happen, how will Dan and Clark go about trying to maximize their potential over the next 3 seasons? And I honestly have zero idea what their plan is.
Well, I think that they have perhaps learned their lesson from the the Nico Estevez era, in the sense of signing these veterans and these older players and trying to compete, and get these playoff spots. I think they've maybe learned their lesson from that. And I will say that because there is this new unannounced publicly initiative inside the club to have half of their roster be from the academy. That is their internal stated goal as an organization. So that goal is a doubling down and a betting on the idea that your academy makes you better than other people, makes you sustain. Maybe it's because they make money from it, or they think they can make money from it. But if you're going to have half your roster be from your academy, you have to sell less than you have been of those players. So I think you also can't really afford to be perceived as treading water for 3 years. I think you still have to try to compete. I think that they will carry forward this playoffs is the minimum we consider to be acceptable. And so I think that they will, whatever coach they hire, I think the stated goal is going to be, you're going to make the playoffs every year. And we as an organization are going to double down on the academy and continue to try and bring through and give you better players that way, as well as these other more recent things we've done with U22 initiatives and your Alan Velasco's and your Ennis Solly's and these other kinds of interesting signings. The trick is going to be, the budget probably will be impacted. I don't think we can, any of us, say that it won't be.
For sure.
In a ticket, in a league where ticket sales really matters a lot, because the TV revenue is not the NFL, right? So it's going to be affected in some way. So unless they sell somebody else for 12 million, you're not going to get another 12 million signing. The key is going to be efficiency of signings, because I think they're going to double down to their old ways, which is smart signings in the proper positions. You can't have wasted cap, wasted salary, luxury players. Again, all part of the bad roster build. You have to fill a certain amount of your roster from academy, or else you're going to lag. And you continue to do decent-ish things in the draft, and that'll be how they'll be competitive. They're not going to go spend, even more so over these 3 years, they're not going to go sign a $15 million a year player like Toronto does, or things like that. So it'll be a lot of ways it'll be similar to it is now. I mean, Musa and Allen and,
Yeah, and probably less answers.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, man.
I mean, that's clear. If you're going to have, if your goal is to have half your roster be academy, you can't have your reserves, deep roster players, and backups be 30-year-old dudes from Israel.
Okay.
Or 35-year-old journeyman center backs, or
I know
36-year-old reserve keepers.
But let's have an honest conversation about that concept of half your roster being academy players. Buzz, I don't know anybody on this planet that doesn't work for the club who has the level and depth of knowledge of the academy than Buzz Carrick. Could you look at me square in the eye and tell me that in 2025 or even 2026 or 2027 that they actually have MLS quality enough players to pull that off?
Not by 24 or 25. It'll take
well, we're in 24 now.
Yeah, sorry, not by 25 or 26. It's why it's initiative. It'll take 3, 4, or 5 years to pull it off. You have to stop selling Tessman and Brian Reynolds. You probably can't stop selling Pappy because you need the 20 million, but you got to stop selling these guys that are only worth a couple mil, or otherwise the 15 players they're talking about are going to be the bottom 15 players. And then that means nothing for you.
Okay. But
you could do that tomorrow if you wanted to, but it'd be worthless.
But let's also, let's introduce into this conversation the reality that players appear to be getting smarter as to their own value. Yeah. And can Dallas continue to sign that type of player? Because it appears, with Gojo and, the kid that went to Birmingham and a couple of these other kids that have left without signing contracts. Corcoran, Eyestone. Can Dallas put deals on the table that will keep some of these kids here long enough to make up that 50%?
Well, NIL may change this landscape a little bit, because I think at some point you'll be able to have guys that have, futzed around in MLS Next Pro probably, and be able to go back to college if it doesn't work out. So that's possible that's going to change the landscape. But the key thing is that since the pandemic, or maybe even just the last 2 years, even FC Dallas has aggressively gone out and recruited and tried to bolster their academy in terms of depth. So like the classes that are coming through now, instead of having 2 or 3 guys that could potentially be pros in each team, there's like 10 guys that could potentially be pros. Now, the trick is, of course, is identifying them and hitting on them. I also think that they're doing a little bit of because they have North Texas, they can actually do a little bit more of spraying of candidates and just signing a fair number of guys and hoping that one of them will pan out. So I think that while at the top of the academy right now, there's not a clear Pappy, but there's the current UAT team. There's literally 5 guys that are already under contract, and there's another 7 or 8 that could end up being pros. Now half of them choose to go to college. There's still greater depth, and by pros I mean get paid to play soccer. That doesn't mean they're going to make it to MLS or Europe. Mm-hmm. So it only takes 2 or 3 guys to get to MLS a year to get to this stated goal. So for example, last year they signed 2 homegrowns, Norris and Tarek Scott, right? Mm-hmm. And then the next year it was Ali Azura, right? So there's a couple of guys down there at North Texas right now on hybrid deals. So over the next season, you're going to see 2, 3 more that are going to turn out to be homegrowns also from that group. So if you continue to have 2, 3 homegrowns a year and don't sell them at such a high rate as they did a little while ago, then you'll really not overnight, but within 3 or 4 or 5 years, you'll get so close to having half your roster be from the academy. It's an achievable goal, in my opinion.
Well, it's an interesting one. It also begs the question of, can you be a serious MLS contender when half your roster is made up of a bunch of kids?
Totally different question.
Yeah. Well,
yeah, that's a totally different question. Yeah.
And I
know.
I think it's a romantic idea, and I think there's an aspect of it I love it. But as somebody, you and I have been watching this league since day one, and I think you and I have a pretty solid handle on the type of roster that can. I think if you go through and look at all 28 winning MLS Cup teams, there are kind of running threads that run through them. And one of those is not a bunch of 20 and 21-year-olds that have all been playing professionally for a year or two.
Yeah, but let's think if you took FC Dallas's team now and forget about Pappy because he's an outlier,
Mhm.
but let's say you kept Tessman, Reynolds, let's see who else have we sold. What if you'd
Cannon,
gotten Jogo, Reggie Cannon? What what if you'd had 4 or 5 of these guys that you sold for money that you in your team? Like this team would be so much better.
Well, okay. Right? See, that's okay. Here's the thing. I think you could make the case that you're correct there, but you're also working off what you know about those players after they left Dallas and went and played in faraway lands. I mean, Tanner Tessman, as a guy that has been playing in Italy, I suspect is a vastly different and superior player than the Tanner Tessman you would have gotten if he had just stayed in Dallas and continued to play in Dallas.
Maybe.
I'm telling you, I just think the level of competition, coaching, the environment, the culture.
He's been playing in Serie 2, Serie B.
Dude, I'm telling you, I think that's way. I just think the overall impact of that is I don't think Tanner Tessman is the same player if he just stayed and played in MLS for the last 3 or 4 years.
It's impossible to say. You
might be right,
but it's not like,
and you may be right.
It's not like he's living at home. I mean, he was out of his comfort zone here as an 18-year-old on his own.
No, I get it, but I also say the same thing about is Reggie the same player he would have been if he had stayed here?
Reggie's case, everything went sideways for him.
Maybe he would have been a better player if he had stayed here.
Maybe he might have been.
I don't know.
Reynolds, I don't know, because Reynolds, that stint at Roma, now that is different. You know what I mean? Like that's a different.
I mean, I would make the argument that there are several players, or not several. There are a few players that would have been better if they had stayed here because they ended up going overseas and getting very little time. Who were the two defenders that ended up going to Germany and playing in like the 11th German division? What's that kid's name?
Well, Nico Carrera, Antonio's brother.
No. The one that really just insisted on going to Germany.
Oh, Justin Shea.
Yeah.
Chris Richards, I guess you could include him in that conversation.
So
Chris Kappas, he could have been here,
right?
No, he couldn't have. MLS screwed them over.
Like, is Chris Richards Chris Richards probably arguably is a better player because he's now playing in the Premier League than if he had stayed in Dallas. So I think that's a romantic idea.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I think really putting a wrench in their plans is this stadium thing. And I find the more I think about how this whole stadium thing has come together, the more curious I am about how long this has been in the works, how it ended up getting so delayed. And I mean, I think it's just ultimately a function of, look, we have to do this, and this is not a good situation of how to do it, but we're just going to have to figure it and do the best of it we can over the course of the next 3 years.
Well, let me first tag that this idea of this kids thing with saying that like there's a difference between an initiative, which is a admirable goal, and like a rule. Like they're efforting to move that direction. So I'm with you that I don't think you can just do it and have it happen. But then let's talk about the stadium specifically. Now, we know that the Hunts are making a bet because they waited and waited and waited for this thing, for the World Cup to be official. And then the World Cup was official. And a month later, here they come. We're going to do this stadium. Remember, we're going to capitalize on the World Cup. They're betting that the soccer in the United States is going to get a bounce like it did after 1994 World Cup, that this World Cup is going to be the same effect. So they're dropping, 180 million, is it? Into this, just the stadium part of this reno, and all this other money, billion or whatever it is, into these ancillary things around the stadium. They're betting on the World Cup bounce, which is why I think they planned this. As long as they've known that the U.S. was trying to get this World Cup, they've been planning this.
I'm of the belief, Buzz, that the Hunt brothers have been trying to pull off this stadium renovation for a long time. I think the fact that the stadium isn't going to be done until 2 years after the 2026 World Cup was never in the plans. I think they wanted to have all this done by the World Cup, and things just business and politics and this, that, and the other all got in the way. And I think the knock-on effects of all of this is the fact that now they're having to do this in the middle of the World Cup. Like, the Hunts are too good at business to try to end up pulling off a stadium reconstruction while the World Cup's actually happening here. Like, that just doesn't make any sense to me. I just think that too many things got in their way, and this is not really how they wanted this to go.
I think when you said politics, it triggered in my brain. You remember that they were waiting for the gambling thing.
Mm-hmm.
They were trying to wait for the Texas to pass the sports book thing, and then it got shut down. And then I think they probably had to rejigger the whole plan once they realized they couldn't get the sports book to wrap the whole other part around.
Yeah.
Right. That may have been what I'm thinking of last summer, was that got defeated. They were kind of waiting for that.
Yeah. The next 3 years are going to be fascinating, whether you're a fan or not a fan, outside observer or whatever. How Dan and Clark approach these 3 seasons is just utterly fascinating stuff.
Well, us talking about it makes me more convinced than ever that they're not going to write a big check for a superstar coach.
Well, is a superstar. I mean, because here's the other component to this problem. How many, what kind of coach wants to come and have to manage in that situation with a stadium that, right? None. Yeah. I mean, what kind of big name player wants to come play in a stadium that's under construction like that?
Man, hopefully the players that they do have that signed on here knowing that this was coming. I mean,
I don't know. Did they?
I hope they did.
I mean, we'll talk about what players are coming and going, staying or leaving in a future episode in the next few weeks or so. But there is just so much up in the air about how this plays out into the lead up for the 28 season. But I just can't get out of my head that this is going to be an ongoing issue, both for the players, the fans, and the front office for 3 entire seasons. That just seems so ridiculous to me.
And that's if it stays on time.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I think the way the plan is written, it's supposed to be done in the middle or somewhere amongst the 27 season. But I think we're all just assuming that the actual finished product won't be ready to go until the beginning of the 28 season.
Well, this is how you know that this really is a bet by them for the long term. This is not a short term bet. This is a long term bet that they're making.
For sure. Yeah. But
I mean, it's going to be beautiful. I'm excited about it.
Sure. It'll be great. I'm sure it'll be fantastic, but they've got to figure out a way to continue to maintain some level of competitive interest in this club for 3 seasons while they wait to try to sell, an extra 3,500 seats on top of what they're already trying to sell. Which, look, here's the reality. By the time 28 comes here, the new stadium, no matter how good or bad the team is, I think interest will be very high, especially because there's a safe standing area. And I think there'll be a lot of interest in that.
Yeah.
But the success of launching that new stadium will be made far easier if over the course of these 3 seasons, they don't repeat 2024 over and over, or 2 of the 3 seasons.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating to see. Like, we talk about this from time to time. Most coaches do a 3 to 5 year cycle, right? You take over a team, it takes you 3 seasons to put the roster into the shape that you want it, and then you get a season or 2 to compete at the highest peak of that roster.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to give a guy a 3-year build, that 3-year build is going to end right when that stadium is finishing, and you're going to have your 4 and 5 of your build, and when you should peak out right when that thing's done.
Yeah.
Or is this the new, because it is Zanata, is this the Central and South American model of I do the team building, you're just here to get the team into the playoffs every year and compete every year, and every year your job's up for hiring or firing, like it is in Mexico or like it is in Brazil. That to me is a more interesting question.
Well, we can save this conversation for next week, which would probably be more appropriate because we'll have a much better handle on the full slate of Luccin's performances. But with Austin firing Jeff Wolf, which, by the way, I don't understand why Josh Wolf 1 game before the end of the season. That's really weird to me.
And they got eliminated. That's why.
Well, yeah, but okay, you still have a game to go. I mean, it seems so stupid. It's like you're so mad at him, you're going to fire him and make him stay home and collect money for doing nothing for a game. It's just so stupid.
I have a theory about that. Go ahead, though.
But the second part is that with Chicago showing some ambition and hiring Greg Berhalter, and who is Austin going to go out and get, and how is Dallas and Dan and Clark Hunt going to look if Austin goes out and hires a Vieira or something, and they go hire,
they will,
Peter Luccin or something.
My assumption about them moving when they did is based on a small piece of news, which is the offseason calendars. That you have to start to make your moves by November 27th. November 27th is when your options and your bona fide offers are due.
Mm-hmm.
And then you, within like 2 weeks after that, there's a half-day trade window, and then you get the expansion draft coming up in mid-December. The college thing is in mid-December, the showcase. So like, okay, if I wait another 2 weeks to fire my coach, it's now the end of October, and now I have exactly 1 month before that. Whereas if I fire him now, I now have 6 weeks until, so I can take 2 or 3 weeks to get my coach in. And now my coach has almost a month before those roster moves have to have him. So I think that's why you do that now. And it raises an interesting question for me, is that since the Hunts are apparently waiting for the season to actually end before they start interviewing people, like we hear names that we don't know of anyone actually doing anything yet. They're obviously quite content to wait and not have that coach in place with a lot of time leading into when those decisions are going to be made. They're organizationally going to be making those calls between the TD, whose name I can't remember, and Zanata, who's the director of soccer operations now, and Dan Hunt, and whatever assistants they have are still around. If it's not Luccin, they tell him, you're going to be an assistant. Is it John Gall? Is it Hayden? They're going to be pulling triggers on this stuff while they might still be interviewing the coaches. So different organizational philosophies probably is what led to them pulling the trigger on Wolf the minute he got eliminated, so that they can go get a coach like in 2 weeks, go get him and have him in place. And Dallas will still be playing at that point. I mean, they might have a coach before Dallas is finished playing Sporting, because they don't play till the 19th. Right.
Yeah.
And if you're a forward thinking owner, you might have already had a very short list of your candidates ready to go when you fired Wolf, and you might have 5 interviews this week and make a call next week. Hypothetically.
No, that's a fair shout. That would be interesting for sure. All right. So we've spent a lot of time talking about a game and the situation on the end of a season. And we'll talk more about that. Let's just real quickly, Dallas Trinity won a road game over Spokane. I did not see it. Did you see it?
No, I did not, because there was a North Texas game and an FC Dallas game at the exact same time.
And speaking of which, North Texas did win their game 8-2.
Yeah, they absolutely smashed Minnesota. They played.
So and then you have in your note here in the run sheet, the red crayon, that they choose Vancouver.
Yes, MLS Next Pro does a very cool bit. I think it's cool, where the top 4 seeds get to pick in each conference from the bottom 4 seeds who they want to play. So Dallas was the number 1 seed, and Houston was the number 8 seed, and they did not pick Houston, the number 8 seed. They picked the number 7 seed.
That has to travel from Vancouver to come here.
Fascinating. Well, it's more than that. They in the little media show they did, the little live YouTube game. They said something about, it's a good team. We haven't seen them much. We want to challenge ourselves. Whatever, dude. That Vancouver team has only won 1 game in their last 12.
Oh.
And over the last 6, they were 1-7-4. So it's like that team is cratering and dying fast and almost crashed out of the playoffs. That's why they picked that team. And Houston Dynamo got really hot at the end and like won their last 3 of the last 4 or something and got in. That's why they didn't go with the 8 seed. They picked the 7 seed. So I think it's super cool, because now you're going to have like, how dare you pick us? It's like all these different fun things that can happen.
That is.
And imagine if this traveled to other sports. Imagine the NBA, if you're the Lakers and you can pick number 1 seed, and you can pick who you want to play in round 1. I mean, imagine if that happened, right? I mean, if this concept could take off into other leagues, I think it'd be crazy fun.
That is pretty cool, actually.
Yeah.
That's an interesting cool. That is fascinating.
Yeah.
All right. Well, good. That'll be fun. Maybe I'll go to one of those games.
You should. It'd be fun.
Will you take me?
Yeah, it's on the 20th is the game against Vancouver.
Okay.
Yeah, come on down.
Very good. Can we walk from your house?
Yeah, we could. I mean, it's a little bit further than Cowboys. It's, a whole mile and a half over there, but we could.
Okay. Anything else, Buzz?
Well, I just want to talk real quick about why North Texas is so good. They're freaking amazing good.
You sure you don't want to save that for another pod? Because we've been going almost an hour and a half.
Well, it's just real quickly because it's related to the bad FC Dallas roster build.
Okay.
It's because FC Dallas brought in all these veteran insurance players that forced down a bunch of players that ordinarily would have filled all that, garbage time and extra time and bonus time. Those players all got forced down to North Texas Soccer Club. And somebody I know who's into the stat stuff sent me like a breakdown, and I'm just going to give this really quick. Almost 50% of the North Texas Soccer Club roster is 22 or 23 years old, right? Those are college kids. Those are Logan Farringtons, although not him, but it's guys that are at the end of their college time. So that is a very mature team that is full of players that should have been like Nolan Norris and Carl Sante playing a lot for FC Dallas and did not. So they only had like 25% of their team that was 18, 19 years old, which is the kids just out of the academy. So it's a heavier, older, experienced team with a lot of talent that all are homegrowns and players they've signed from North Texas previously that are supposed to be their up and coming players that all shuttled down because of this bad FC Dallas build. So the beneficiaries of one part of that is North Texas Soccer Club. So they're really, really good. And they've got 5-6 players that'll, or more that'll easily be contributors to this team over the next couple of seasons for sure.
The problem is MLS Next Pro is just not a very good level overall.
Right. That's the thing. These guys need to be playing at a better level, whether it be garbage time in MLS or something else, or just being like with the first team more than they were and having them down. Like Nolan goes down there and he bosses those games when he's down there. You know what I mean? It's like, that's why they're really, really good, because they have really, really good players that should have been with FC Dallas.
Very good. All right. Well, we missed Dan. I missed Dan today. I'm sorry Dan was not here.
Yeah, but you got to pay those OnlyFans bills, get the OnlyFans money right now.
I know. Those are big checks he makes.
They're much bigger than ours.
Affords those fancy cars he drives. All right. Well, thanks, Buzz. That's a good time. Good stuff.
Yeah, man. Thanks for being here. And next week we'll have to figure out what to talk about. No game.
Oh,
I have an idea.
Okay. I hope it's fun. Can you make it fun?
Yeah, we'll probably play Dump or Keep, which is always fun.
We love Dump or Keep.
Yeah, usually we wait till the end of the season, but the season's over and we have nothing to talk about, so we might as well start, right?
Ask me Dump or Keep Sonata.
Dump or Keep Sonata.
Dump. With capital ump.
Capital ump.
That's right. All right. Thanks, Buzz.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you, FC Dallas Curious fan. Have a great weekend. Go team. Although we don't have a game this week. Hey, it's the debut of Pochettino this weekend with the U.S. men's national team. Yeah. No. Come on.
And his assistant, Nico Estevez.
Yes, and his son. Where's all the cries of nepotism now, everybody?
Oh, they were there. They were there.
Oh, were they? Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
Some.
Okay. All right. Very good. All right. And so thank you, FC Dallas Curious fan. We will speak to you next week on another fun-filled episode of Third Degree, the podcast.
Dan, hurry up.
Third Degree, the Third Degree Net Podcast. Third Degree, the Third Degree Net Podcast.